Here is how France reached the World Cup final. Part 1. The early beginnings. Since France and England are only 20 miles apart at the Channel's narrowest point, football only had a short journey to make. The newspaper The Scotsman put it this way in 1863. A number of English gentlemen living in Paris have lately organized a football club. The football contests take place in the Bois de Boulogne by permission of the authorities and surprise the French amazingly. In the next decades, modern versions of the game reached the country and its popularity started to increase. By the turn of the century, the French were competing at the Olympics, where they reached second place, and the USFSA, the National Sports Union, was responsible for the internal footballing matters as well as selecting a team to represent France. Since they had taken part in the 1900 Olympics Games under the name USFSA 11 or Club Français, the official date of the first international game of the French national team, a draw against Belgium, is recorded as May 1st, 1904. With everyone saying nowadays that France could field two teams and still win the World Cup, we need only to look back at the 1908 Olympics, where France A and France B participated. The A team, under FIFA's jurisdiction, would dispute official matches, whilst the B team, controlled by the USFSA, would take part in the unofficial ones. Following many reorganizations and disputes, the French Football Federation was formed in 1919. A momentous 2-1 win against England was followed by highs and lows on the international stage and at the Olympics. In 1930, France answered the call to take part in the inaugural World Cup and traveled to Uruguay. They scored the first two goals in World Cup history through Lucien Laurent and Marcel Languier in a 4-1 win against Mexico. Sadly, it was not the beginning of a fairy tale. They lost the following two games against Argentina and Chile. Following the tournament, the first black player, Raoul Diagne, and the first player of North African descent, Lorbi Bembarek, made their debuts for the national team. After elimination in the first round at the hands of Austria in 1934, France would host the 1938 edition. On home soil, they vanquished the Belgians 3-1 in the first round, but could not match Italy's strength in the quarterfinals. World War II brought about a suspension to international competitions, and the France team played a handful of games in between their country being ravaged. In 1950, a massive improvement in quality with players like Just Fontaine and Raymond Kopa happened, and teams like Reims, who reached the European Cup final 2 times. At the 1950 World Cup, France did not take part, being eliminated by Yugoslavia in qualifying. The qualification for the next 2 tournaments went in a similar way, with France breezing through the groups with high margin wins. The first story at the first tournament would be very different. In 1954, they got knocked out in the group stages, but in 1958 they snatched bronze medal. The team, inspired by Fontaine, would fall in the semi-finals at the hands of Pelé's Brazil, but managed a 6-3 win over the West Germans in the third place match. France reached the semis at the 1960 Euros after storming past Greece and Austria, and were awarded the hosting rights. At the semi-final stage, however, they fell victim to Yugoslavia as they could not count on Fontaine or Kopa. The 1960s were not kind to the France national team, seeing them miss out on almost all major tournaments and the old guard retire. From 1960 to 1978, France only took part in the 1966 World Cup, where they finished last in their group. After replacing multiple managers, in March 1969, Georges Boulogne took the reins, and despite failing to qualify for any major tournaments, he is credited with modernizing the game in France, with the nation now emphasizing youth development and modern training. He was replaced by France's only foreign manager to date, the Romanian Ștefan Kovac. Kovac, who had succeeded Rinus Michels at Ajax and continued the team's success, implemented his total football philosophy and focused on youth development. His assistant, Michel Hidalgo, replaced him in 1976, continuing his work. The hard work of previous managers paid off, and with Platini in the ranks, France qualified for the 1978 World Cup. Despite strong results in their pre-tournament friendlies, the inexperience of the young squad showed in Argentina, with them going out in the groups. Following the failure to qualify for the 1980 European Championship, the final piece of their magic square arrived. Jean Tigana joined Platini, Gires and Genghini just in time for them to start qualifying for the 1982 World Cup. At the final tournament, France finished second in the first group stage and won the second one to reach the semis. The game against Germany will be an all-time classic. The 3-3 scoreline, with 4 of the goals coming in extra time, was overshadowed by the actions of the good German goalkeeper. Harald Schumacher clattered into Patrick Pattisson, the French player suffering vertebral damage, lost teeth and going into a coma. The referee did not even award a free kick. To add insult to literal injury, the Germans went through on penalties. In the next game, Poland won the bronze medal in a game where many of the French stars were rested. The 1984 Euros were to be held in France, and the nation had high expectations for their favourites. In the series of friendlies prior to the tournament, a new iteration of the Magic Square was born, with Luis Fernandez joining Tigana as the deep-lying playmakers and Platini and Gires in front of them. This midfield quartet was in full song at the final tournament, beating Denmark, Belgium and Yugoslavia in the groups. A semi-final tie against Portugal followed, with Platini scoring the decider in extra time to win 3-2. Platini was once again instrumental in the final, opening the scoring. France managed to win 2-0, even going down to 10 men. 2 more gold medals followed at the 1984 Summer Olympics and the Artemio Franchi Trophy, a precursor to the Confederations Cup. The next World Cup saw the French as favourites, with the team being nicknamed the Brazilians of Europe. Despite Platini and Gires playing through injuries, they managed to get out of the groups and were due to face Italy in the knockouts. Platini scored in a 2-0 win, and now the European Brazilians would face the actual Brazilians. Another important Platini goal meant that the game finished 1-1 in regular and extra time. A tense and nervy shootout followed, with players like Socrates and Platini missing. Ultimately, Luis Fernandez scored to send his country through. In the semi-final, the eternal enemy awaited, Germany. The injuries and fatigue of the previous rounds took their toll, France's star players being ineffective, and the Germans ran out 2-0 winners. The old guard, including Platini and Gires, retired after the tournament. Part 2. The Modern Era. A new transitional period followed. That's how the French national team failed to qualify for the 1988 Euros and the 1990 World Cup. This period, however, saw the developments behind the scenes that would impact world football to this day. The Clairefontaine Academy, which cost 104 million francs to produce, was inaugurated in 1988, and a new crop of young players like Jean-Pierre Papin, Eric Cantona, Laurent Blanc and Didier Deschamps were introduced to the national team by manager Michel Platini. Sadly, it did not immediately show results, France exiting the 1992 Euros at the group stage, prompting Platini to resign. Gérard Houllier stepped up from assistant to team principal as the nation looked to qualify for the 1994 World Cup. Losses against Bulgaria and Israel meant that the final group game would decide who would go to the US. In a cagey match, France and Bulgaria were locked in a 1-1 draw, and with time running out, David Ginola was expected to run down the clock as he received the ball near the corner flag. He instead attempted a cross for Cantona, which was intercepted and used by the Bulgarians to surprise France on the counter, ultimately scoring. The fallout was massive. Houllier stepped down and Ginola left for England after being harshly criticized and ridiculed. In 2011, news became known that the 2 Bulgarian players, including the goal scorer, had crossed illegally into France for that fateful game. Just as Platini emerged and the national team were in dire need of an old golden era, Zinedine Zidane made his debut alongside Lilian Thuram under manager M. Jacquet. In the 1996 Euro qualifiers, they finished second behind Romania, which was still sufficient to ensure qualification. Cantona had been banned throughout the qualification because of his infamous kung fu kick, and manager Jacquet preferred not to call him up for the final tournament, wanting to keep the same lineup. This proved unwise, as the France drew both of their knockout games, exiting the tournament on penalties in the semi-finals against the Czech. The crowning moment of French football would come in 1998 on home soil. Being exempt from qualifying meant that they played a number of friendlies in order to prepare for the tournament, where the expectations of a whole nation would rest on their shoulders. In these friendlies, a new crop of players emerged, including Patrick Vieira, Robert Pires, David Trezeguet and of course Thierry Henry. At the World Cup, they won all 3 group games, and the Laurent Blanc golden goal in the round of 16 against Paraguay meant that they would face Italy in the quarters. It came down to a penalty shootout, which the French won 4-3, before meeting Croatia in the semi-finals. Just like in 2022, Croatia had punched well above their weight and opened the scoring, but could not stop France from scoring 2 goals and reaching the final. Zidane's masterclass during the game and Ronaldo's famous convulsive episode before the final meant that France ran out 3-0 winners and 60 million French citizens were absolutely ecstatic. France kept their status as the best team in the world, winning the 2000 Euros in Belgium and the Netherlands. Despite finishing second in their group behind the Netherlands, they won the tournament with 3 2-0, 2-1 wins in the knockouts against Spain, Portugal and Italy. The latter two being decided by golden goals. With the 2001 Confederations Cup win, France completed the international treble and were on top of the world. Surely, nothing bad could happen to this wonderful team. They would probably dominate international football for years to come. The wake-up call suffered by France at the 2002 World Cup was as rough as they come. At a tournament that was mired in controversy and produced its fair share of upsets, France were eliminated in the group stage. The World and European Confederations champions failed to score in their 3 group games, and defeat to Senegal and Denmark and the draw against Uruguay saw them fly home, tails firmly tucked between their legs. The 2004 Euros was prepared by a managerial change, and with a fully fit squad, France won their group. The highlight game was a 2-1 win against England, with Zidane scoring 2 goals after the 90th minute. Another shock would happen regarding both the French and the wider footballing world, as Greece knocked out France and went all the way to snatch the trophy in Portugal. Another managerial change saw Raymond Domenech take charge and begin the qualification process for the 2006 World Cup. After some initial struggles, some older and more experienced players returned to the squad, which saw them qualify. With a vintage side, France finished second in their group behind Switzerland, and Spain awaited in the round of 16. A 3-1 win saw France progress to the quarters against Brazil. Zinedine Zidane ran the whole game and can be counted as one of the very few players to out-dribble the Brazilians. The quarters and the semis were both dispatched with 1-0 wins, Henry scoring against Brazil and Zidane against Portugal. In the final, they would meet the country of his old employers, Italy. The Italians had been, maybe foolishly, dismissed, having been rocked by the Calciopoli scandal, but nonetheless, they were a quality side. France scored first through the maestro himself, only to concede via Materazzi. The Italian would be at the epicenter of another crucial moment of the game, taunting Zidane, which prompted the Frenchman to headbutt him and be shown a red card. Without its talisman, the French team succumbed to a penalty defeat, and Zidane's illustrious career came to an acrimonious end. Just like after Platini's retirement, France seemed to go on a downward spiral without its most important player. The 2008 Euros would mark a new low, with a draw against Romania and losses against Italy and the Netherlands, seeing France exit that tournament's group of death in last place. The FFF decided in a meeting to retain the confidence in Domenech, despite public calls for Didier Deschamps to be considered for the job. Controversy would continue to plague the squad. The qualifiers for the 2010 World Cup got off to a rocky start, and at the end of them, France went into the playoffs. During the second leg tie against the Republic of Ireland, Henry's infamous handball saw the French progress to the final tournament, while all hell would break loose. After drawing with Uruguay, they saw themselves losing to Mexico in the second game. At halftime, Nicolas Anelka clashed with manager Raymond Domenech, and the FA called the latter and Evra in for a meeting. The decision was made to send Anelka home. Patrice Evra subsequently got into a scuffle with coach Robert Duverne, and the team cancelled 3 training sessions. The team's managing director resigned, and the players, with Domenech in charge, criticized the FA for sending Anelka home, whilst the FA condemned the team's antics. With such a climate of outrage, a defeat against South Africa was almost inevitable, and France went home last in their group once again. Domenech left the team, the director of the federation resigned, and the new manager Laurent Blanc announced a clean slate for the players at the heart of the controversy. He promised a fresh start for the national team. Blanc's reign would ultimately be a short one, with shaky performances in the 2012 qualifiers and the quarter-final exit at the final tournaments at the hand of Spain. Didier Deschamps was named as the new manager, but the team needed another playoff win to qualify for the 2014 World Cup. In Brazil, the team fared a bit better, managing to reach the quarter-finals, where eventual winners Germany knocked them out. Despite this exit, a new dawn was fast approaching, with a new star Paul Pogba being named Young Player of the Tournament in 2014. France were granted the hosting rights to another tournament and gave an extremely good account of themselves, reaching the final. However, the fairy tale would not have a happy ending, with the hosts not being able to win a tournament on home soil for the third consecutive time due to a late goal in the final by Portugal. The upwards trajectory was there for all to see, and the squad that would lead them to victory in Russia was beginning to take shape. At the postponed Euro 2020, Switzerland shocked the world by eliminating the World Cup champions on penalties, but France seems to become a bigger and bigger monster as years go by. The obscene amount of depth they have meant that even with a number of high-profile injuries, they still managed to reach the final in 2022. A bright future seems to be on the horizon for France as we head into the Euro 2024 qualifiers.